So, as of recording this, today's my birthday. Normally, I wouldn't even bring it up. However, something's been on my mind. And instead of talking about age or milestones or what I've accomplished, I find myself thinking about purpose. Not because I have it all figured out, and not because I think purpose is something you're supposed to have neatly defined by a certain point in your life, but because this last year asked me to let go of a lot. And when you strip things back like that, what's left tends to matter. Purpose doesn't have to be grand or intimidating. Sometimes it's as simple as being well enough to enjoy being alive. And if that's all you can hold today, that's enough. Hi, loves. Welcome back to Amy's View Unscripted. I'm Amy, and this is Life in Motion, where we connect with intention and grow with purpose, moving the whole world forward by becoming who we're meant to be. And today, that word, purpose, feels worth sitting with a little longer. When I started thinking about purpose this year, I realized something interesting. I don't think purpose always shows up as something we just suddenly discover one day. And I don't think it always arrives as a clear calling either. In my own experience, it showed up more like remembering. And I know that won't be everyone's experience. Some people discover their purpose later, some build it slowly, and some people are still searching. All of that is valid. This just happens to be how it unfolded for me. When I look back, before expectations, before performance, before I knew how to explain myself, there were parts of me that were just already there. Not polished, not defined, but present. Instead of asking when you found your purpose, I think a better place to start is this. Think about who you were when you were young and carefree, before the ideas of society really got a hold of you. Before you knew what was impressive, before you knew what was useful, before you knew who you were supposed to be. What did you gravitate toward? What lit you up without needing a reason? Maybe it was movement, or creativity, or being outside. Maybe it was caring deeply, or imagining whole worlds in your head, or feeling more strongly than the people around you seemed to. At that age, those instincts weren't strategic. They weren't learned or encouraged. They were instinctual. And that matters. Because before we learn how to edit ourselves, we tend to move towards what feels most alive, towards what feels honest, and toward what nourishes us without justification. There's often a kind of ease there, a way of being that doesn't need an audience or even an outcome, just presence. As we get older, we are taught, sometimes subtly, sometimes loudly, to trade presence for performance, to measure ourselves by productivity, by usefulness, by how well we fit into the world as it already exists. But those early pulls don't disappear, they just get quieter. Looking back at them now doesn't translate into any sort of age regression, but it means we're allowed to recognize the thread that's always been there. Some people are taught empathy. Some people remember it. What stands out most when I look back isn't one defining moment. It's a way of being. I was loving before I knew that love was something people analyzed. creative before creativity needed to be useful, thoughtful before thoughtfulness became productivity. It existed without justification. I didn't need a reason to enjoy being alive. And as adults, we tend to overlook these early signals because they don't look impressive enough. They don't come with credentials or clarity or a 5-step plan. But moments of aliveness aren't random, they're information. Of course, when you're built this way, with openness and sensitivity as your default, you feel it when the world doesn't speak the same language. I didn't feel different because I was rebellious or defiant. I felt different because I was soft. It wasn't that love wasn't present. It was the way that I experienced and expressed the world didn't always have a place to land. And when that happens, you don't necessarily harden. You don't necessarily act out. You turn inward, not as a retreat, but as an orientation. I learned how to be with myself early because that's where things felt the clearest. Creativity lived there. Faith made sense there. Imagination and reflection finally had room to exist. Inwardness and introspection became a strength before I ever knew it could be one. The thread running through all of this, always, was love. The desire to be loved for who we truly are is deeply human. And when that desire isn't fully met, even in subtle ways, it shapes us. It sharpens our awareness and it teaches us what matters. For me, love became both a wound and a compass. There was a time in my life when the desire to be loved nearly broke me, almost taking my breath. And there was a moment when the realization of love saved me. I don't share that for drama. I share it because it explains why purpose, for me, is not abstract. It's embodied. It's lived. It's relational in the truest sense. At some point, purpose stopped feeling like a question that I needed to answer. And it definitely stopped feeling like something I had to figure out. Because for a long time, purpose felt like it had to look like certainty. Like a sentence you could confidently say without flinching. But that never felt true to my experience. What I noticed over time was that purpose started to feel like less of a destination and more like alignment. Paying attention to when I softened instead of tensed up. When I felt more like myself instead of being simply more impressive. And that shift changed everything. Instead of asking, what am I supposed to do with my life? I started asking, what feels honest right now? And that question is a lot kinder. I want to slow down here because I think a lot of people feel like they have to choose. Choose between being powerful or being kind. Choose between being visible or being gentle. Between burning bright or burning warm. And I don't think that's true. Burning bright for me looks like clarity, honesty, visibility, and not shrinking away from what I know to be true. And burning warm looks like care, presence, and creating space where people feel safe enough to stay. For a long time, I tried to split those things. I tried to make myself smaller so that I wouldn't overwhelm people, or harder so that I wouldn't be dismissed. But neither felt right. What finally clicked is realizing that my nature isn't either or. I'm not meant to dim myself to be safe, and I'm not meant to scorch everything around me to be strong. I'm meant to do both, to illuminate and warm. That's not something I decided, it's something that I noticed over time by paying attention to alignment. This is where I want to return back to what I said at the beginning. Purpose doesn't have to be grand. We've been sold this idea that purpose has to look like a calling or a mission or something that makes sense to other people. And that can be intimidating, especially if you're tired or healing or just trying to stay afloat. Sometimes purpose is simply being well enough to enjoy being alive. Sometimes it's learning how to take care of your body. Sometimes it's learning how to say no. Sometimes it's letting yourself want without apologizing or justifying. That doesn't make it small. That makes it real. What I noticed over time was that alignment didn't just change how I thought, it's changed how I live. Once I started recognizing myself more clearly, I also started taking care of my body differently, from a place of honoring what I actually need. I started listening to what my body was asking for. I set boundaries I didn't even know I was allowed to set. And I noticed the louder my intuition got, the more I respected it. There's this idea that becoming yourself is additive, like you're constantly piling on new habits or identities. But for me, it didn't feel like adding anything. It felt like shedding, like realizing that a lot of what I was carrying wasn't me. It was pressure or survival or old patterns that made sense once, but they don't anymore. And once you shed a skin, you can't put it back on because it just doesn't fit anymore. The version of me that tolerated certain things or ignored certain signals just doesn't exist in the same way now. It doesn't mean that she was wrong, it just means she did her job. And now I get to live from a place that feels more honest, more spacious, and more sustainable. And that's a very steady feeling. If you're watching this and you don't feel like you've found your purpose yet, that's okay. You're not late. You're not missing something. You might still be discovering, or building, or resting. And all of that counts. If it helps, maybe the question isn't, what am I meant to do? Maybe it's, what feels honest for me right now? What brings you peace after you do it? What makes you feel more like yourself and not less? What doesn't require you to pretend? You don't have to answer anything today. Just noticing is enough. And personally, I do feel like I've found myself for who I am in this moment. And more importantly, I trust that I'll keep meeting her as I grow. That thought used to scare me. The idea of growing out of someone I knew so intimately. Now it comforts me because every version of me has served her purpose. Whether that was learning a lesson, defending me in ways I didn't understand at the time, or cocooning for a while to heal. It's comforting to know that there are new versions of myself still waiting to be met. And just as comforting to know that every past version of myself can genuinely rest easy. And maybe purpose, for all of us, has less to do with becoming someone new and more to do with listening to that inner call to come back home to your truest self. Knowing that every version of you along the way helped guide you there. Before I close, I just want to say thank you, truly, for being here, for listening, and for letting me share this space with you. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to do one thing. Share it with someone who might need a little permission to slow down. Or leave a comment and tell me what your version of purpose looks like right now. Even if it's simple, even if it's unfinished, no such thing. That kind of reflection matters more than you think. And finally, I'll leave you where we began. Purpose doesn't have to be grand. Sometimes it's simply being well enough to enjoy being alive. Thank you again for being here, and happy holidays. I'll see you soon.